This video will introduce you to what we do at Evidence for Learning and specifically take a deep dive into the Teaching and Learning Toolkit.
Evidence for Learning supports great practice to become common practice in education. Our vision is an Australia where evidence-informed practices increase learning so that all children, regardless of background, make the best possible progress. As an evidence intermediary, we look to support leaders and teachers to make better school decisions informed by evidence. We do this through three areas of our work of building, sharing, and encouraging the use of evidence. We build evidence of what works in education by commissioning trials in partnerships with evaluators and program developers. We share evidence through our Teaching and Learning Toolkit and Early Childhood Education Toolkit, which provides summaries of various educational approaches drawing on the best available international research. And finally, we support schools to use evidence, working with school leaders and teachers at workshops and seminars, developing guidance reports on areas of interest and building resources to help schools put evidence-informed decisions into practice. Working nationally, Evidence for Learning builds partnerships and collaborations in support of schools and educators. At the end of 2019, we had worked with almost 8,000 educators at more than 160 events. Before we walk through the Teaching and Learning Toolkit, commonly referred to as just the Toolkit, it's helpful to understand the types of evidence that inform the Toolkit findings. Myself and our director, Matthew Deeble, wrote a paper for the Centre for Strategic Education, which featured this diagram. This is what we call the hierarchy of evidence. The foundation of the pyramid is where much of the evidence begins. Things such as program descriptions, ideas and anecdotes, which often reflect emerging practices. Realistic reviews, case studies, for example, give us greater understanding of the approaches they are researching and promising practices that might exist in a number of settings. Looking at level 2, these are our randomised controlled trials and quasi-experimental studies. Quasi-experimental studies are distinct from randomised controlled trials as they have a separate control group involving separate schools. These two types of evidence at level 2 are rigorous studies, and they paint a clearer picture of how approaches respond to being scaled. Then if we look at level number 1, this is our systematic reviews. This is at the top of the pyramid, and these draw a number of trials together in order for us to make confident claims about the trends and outcomes of a particular approach. All of the evidence that sits behind the toolkit, with the exception of the Australasian research summaries, are drawn from the top 2 tiers of this hierarchy of evidence. Now let's take a closer look at the Teaching and Learning Toolkit. The toolkit is a free online summary of educational research. It's designed to inform practice by identifying the most effective approaches for improving student outcomes. It references international and local research and applies it to that of an Australian context. It's a live resource, regularly updated as new studies from around the world are reviewed and included. It can be found at evidenceforlearning.org.au in the top navigation bar under the Toolkits and the Teaching and Learning Toolkit. It's arranged into 35 different approaches, including approaches such as feedback, mastery learning, metacognition, and self-regulated learning. Each approach has 3 key pieces of information. as shown by a symbol to help you make evidence-informed decisions in your school or classroom. This includes the average month's worth of learning progress, the cost to implement, and the security of the evidence. The first symbol is a numerical value showing a month's worth of learning progress. This is an estimate of the additional month's progress you can expect students to make as a result of an approach being used in a school, taking an average of students' progress over a year as a benchmark. So this is a translation from an effect size. The dollar sign shows the cost of the approach, with prices ranging from $1 sign, which indicates a cost of less than $160 per student per year, to $5 signs, which indicates a cost of over $2,000 per student per year. Cost estimates are based on the approximate cost of implementing an approach in a class of 25 students. And cost estimates commonly include the cost of additional resources and the cost of training or of professional development. The final symbol is a padlock indicating the security of the findings. This is based on both the quantity and quality of the available evidence and the reliability of the impact measurements. One padlock indicates a very limited amount of evidence, while 5 padlocks indicates extensive evidence with at least 5 robust and recent meta-analyses. You can view a snapshot of all 35 approaches or filter by a range of topics or settings. There are over 10,000 studies included within the 35 different approaches. Evidence for Learning's Early Education Toolkit went live in 2019. The Early Childhood Education Toolkit is designed to support educators who are making decisions about how to improve learning and development for young children. It is underpinned by approximately 1,700 studies. When you have found the approach you're looking for, you can click through to the summary page. Both toolkits can be accessed through the website at evidenceforlearning.org.au. You'll find them in the menu bar. Let's look at feedback as an example in the Teaching and Learning Toolkit. The first thing you'll find is a description about the approach. Then you can read a description about the effectiveness of the approach. This often describes what types of interventions have been successful. Below this is a description of the amount of evidence that sits behind the approach and how secure that evidence is. Then there are the costs to implement the approach. The final section includes several things that teachers or school leaders should consider when adopting an approach for their setting. This is particularly important as high-quality implementation can make a significant difference on students' learning outcomes. If you refer to the right-hand sidebar, you'll also see each toolkit strand has references and a summary of the individual studies included for the toolkit strand. And finally, there is a further reading relevant to this teaching and learning approach. You'll see there is a link for all strands to the Australasian Research Summary. Evidence for Learning has added additional information in the toolkit with a section focused on Australasian evidence through a collaboration with the Melbourne Graduate School of Education at the University of Melbourne and with Telos on Kids for the early childhood approaches. They offer summaries and analysis of individual Australasian summaries for each approach. Educators are using the toolkit in a variety of ways to inform their practice at their school. Here are just a few examples of how school leaders and teachers have found the toolkit useful in helping with their practice. And I'll give you some time now to read these quotes. There are a number of ways that you can continue to engage with the work at Evidence for Learning. We would love to hear from you about how you're using the toolkit and any of the other resources in your work. If you have any questions or feedback, please email me on tvaughan@evidenceforlearning.org.au, or you can connect with us in a variety of ways. So you can subscribe to our e-newsletter at evidenceforlearning.org.au. You can follow us on Twitter at E4L Tweets, and also we're on Facebook and YouTube as well. Feel free to attend our webinar series. We'd love to have you there. These run every month on a Tuesday night. And you can also join our Evidence-Informed Educator Network to stay on top of the work that's coming.